corals are as protected as tigers are. So destroying Nicobar corals is as if you're killing hundreds and hundreds of tigers in India. And it's similar to essentially destroying Project Tiger. A few months ago, I went to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and I came back with a mission to protect the Great Nicobar Islands. I saw incredible forests that run right down to the sea. I met people from both the settler and tribal communities who spoke about the importance of preserving our natural heritage. The massive project being planned by the Modi government could wipe out one of India's treasures. Forests that belong to tribal communities, the Shompen, the Nicobarese, are being signed away in meetings those communities were never even part of. So I sat down with two people who have spent their entire lives studying these islands. Dr. Vardhan, a coral reef biologist who's been diving these reefs since 2005, and Dr. Manish Chandi, who's worked in the Andamans and Nicobars for 25 years. What they told me, I think every Indian needs to hear. Some of it genuinely shocked me. I've also put out a video on the Great Nicobar Project on my YouTube channel, releasing alongside this episode. Here's a moment from it. Now, what is the plan? The plan is you cut these thousands and thousands of trees and you illegally ship them out and you make billions and billions of dollars. And you use that money to build your hotels, your casinos, and your little real estate play. That's what's going on. First, listen to this. Listen to the people who actually know these islands.
Hi Rahul, I'm Vardhan. I'm a coral reef biologist and I've been working in the Nicobar Islands since 2005. 2005 was my first dive, and since then I've been working on the reefs, largely marine systems. My PhD was in the Nicobar Islands coral reefs, where I was looking at the impact of major catastrophes like tsunami, bleaching, how they impact the reef. After that, I've also worked on marine mammals, on turtles, on dugongs, on a range of things. Right now, I work as a conservation director in a global organization where I'm looking at the impact of conservation activities of this organization called GBI. In terms of my interest, I'm fascinated by everything that lives underwater, especially coral reefs, because of course, they are so beautiful.
And I'm Dr. Manish Chandi. I have been working similarly as a researcher in the Andamans for about 25 years. I began my career there in the year 1995 actually. And I began my work in the Nicobars from the year 2000, and it was before the tsunami. And I worked on a thesis which looked at how resources were being managed by the communities across the Nicobar Islands, especially in the light of the tsunami, which kind of completely put in disarray the entire resource management framework of the traditional and the indigenous resource management framework. So my thesis has looking at sharing mechanisms and resource conflicts. And what I've learned, the gist of it essentially is that the Nicobarese across the islands, the archipelago, have developed excellent and evolved systems over millennia of how to avoid conflict over the limitations of resources. And that goes to say even the Shompen and the Nicobarese are very, very clear on the limitations to natural resources. They're very clear about it. If you go by Schumacher's work on Small is Beautiful, right, an economist rendering, these guys who don't know how to read and write have already learned it by themselves on their own terms.
No, there's also I remember that even when the tsunami came, the reaction of the tribals was fundamentally different to the reaction of non-tribal people. The tribals had a memory of the tsunami and they ran away, whereas the non-tribals, didn't have a memory of the tsunami. And they went into the sea to grab fish when the water pulled back. I've heard this story. Now, this story is emblematic of the fact that our tribal populations actually understand the environment, fit into the environment much more effectively than modern people, or than people who are used to modern amenities and live in a so-called modern framework. So I think, I think these are our tribal populations, people in the Nicobar, people in the Andamans, are almost advance warning for the type of damage that we are doing to our environment, to our islands, to our forests, to our mountains, and we need to, instead of removing them from the process, instead of disenfranchising them, we need to listen to them.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. In fact, the Nicobaris have a lot of folklore and folk tales of former events, which they didn't have a word for, like such as tsunami is a Japanese word. But there are folklore and folk tales of how tidal waves, large tidal waves, have come in and washed out villages, and some villages have been turned to stone, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, I've recorded some of them as part of my work, and it, like you said afterwards, there is an immense respect for the natural environment that they live in. And the very fact that in most of the islands there's more than 90% of natural forest just goes to show how beautifully and how wonderfully they've been able to adapt and live with their own ecosystems. And there's so much for us to learn rather than teaching them how to live on their islands.
Exactly.
And that I think is a primary, a very fundamental flaw that we have kind of undertaken of trying to teach and kind of civilize or so-called civilize these people who we have much to learn from actually.
It's a flawed idea of modernity, flawed idea of advancement,
Absolutely.
just to negate everything that doesn't make sense to you. One of the things that I'd like you to speak about, when I first went to the Andaman Nicobar Islands, I was fascinated by the different types of flora, fauna, coral life that was living there. I mean, I remember saltwater crocodiles, remember the turtles.
Absolutely.
I remember the huge crabs that climb up coconut trees. So could you give us like a 2-minute overview on how nature in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is fundamentally different than rest of the world, how it's unique and has its own ecosystem, and then has these elements that are found nowhere other than Andaman and Nicobar Islands?
Yeah, I'll tell you that. Very recently, in fact, a friend of mine from the islands had shared a small video of a king cobra on the beach. And there's no other part on the universe in our world where you will find a king cobra sauntering around the beach. There's absolutely no other place because king cobras have very specific habitats, and they're found in tropical rainforest and high elevation forests. But in the Andamans, there are beaches which have forests touching the seashore virtually. Evergreen forest touching the seashore. I mean, irrespective of the fact that there are mangroves, there are mangrove creeks, but on the shoreline you have forests. So along this entire forest, along the entire islands, like you've said, there's an extremely rich biodiversity that is found in the islands, and it has been there for the longest time. In fact, if you look at some of the old British records by M.V. Portman, one of the administrators of the islands, he has written about a 2-volume book called A History of Our Relations with the Andamanese. And in that, when they were exploring the islands on their sea journeys, voyages, you can read that they keep a repeat of there a turtle pops out of the water, another turtle popping out of the water when they're taking a breath. It's just rich with marine life and rich with the forest life as well. And both the Nicobaris and the Andaman Islanders have various systems of being able to use and how they can partition resources on their islands. So the biological diversity that's found there, like you've rightly pointed out, is first of all, it's a tropical landscape, very close to the Sunda biological diversity hotspot, which gives it this added nuance of being extremely rich underwater as well. So the marine realm is another world altogether. It's where Vardhan can speak about in a better fashion. It's got immense amount of diversity in the coral reefs. New species are being discovered. In fact, another friend of mine who goes fishing there often as a sport fisher put down his line very recently, about 3 weeks ago, and he brought out an underwater, a deep sea fish, which has not been recorded for the longest time, and it is put back into the water. So you have a large amount of both small marine life as well as large marine life like whales, blue whales, sperm whales, which are found in those waters, false killer whales as well. And of course, the whole range of four species of turtles that are found in the Indian water are all come and found nesting in those islands.
And is it true? Is it true that these turtles they go all the way to Australia and come back, and they nest only in one place?
Yeah, not just Australia. So the giant leatherback sea turtle, which is the world's largest marine turtle, which again nests only in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and very few beaches in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in all of our Indian subcontinent. They are known to have, I mean, we have tagged them. I mean, my colleagues who are working on sea turtle conservation and research have done both geotags, satellite telemetry to look at how they kind of move across the ocean. And we've recorded turtles going back all the way down to Australia and also through Indonesia, all the Indonesian waters, and even all the way even west, further towards Sudan and the African coast as well. So there are few nesting spots of the leatherback sea turtle across the planet, from Mexico to the African subcontinent and the Indian subcontinent in Indonesia and so on and so forth. And all turtles have this instinct of being able to go back to their natal beaches where they were born. And a female to a mother turtle, once a male turtle is born, a male turtle never comes back on land ever again, only unless he's washed ashore or gets caught in a ghost net or something like that. But otherwise, all sea turtles, the females, they come back to their natal beaches where they were born. But also ingrained in them, apart from their own natal beaches, are other beaches where their mothers have also nested at. So they will go and use those nesting sites. There is well proven science and a knowledge of how they kind of navigate the oceans, and they go to those natal nesting beaches. And also of importance and relevance is the fact that it is very well known that when you have a lot of coastal lighting, where you have ports or you have tourism establishments, etc., sea turtles refrain from those waters and move away because they know there's a disturbance there and there's a disorientation that takes place for both the mother turtle and even the young ones once they hatch out, and which results in a lot of mortality. And therefore, it's very well known, and that port development or even tourism establishments along the beaches, like for instance in Goa, a lot of the Goa's nesting beaches were nesting beaches at one point of time, about 50, 60 years ago. A lot of those have stopped because of the immense amount of tourism that has taken place on the beaches.
Okay.
So, and in the Andaman Nicobar, you have all these 4 species of turtles nesting. The giant leatherback is only found mostly in the Nicobars and a couple of beaches in the Andamans as well. And the Galathiya Bay is one of the most frequented nesting sites of the leatherback sea turtle. And they have a preference for open beaches which don't have a coral reef in the absolute front of the beach, so they can swim all the way up and land on the beach and then go into nest. Because they're very heavy. They weigh close to about half a ton at times, and they can grow between 5 to 6 feet in length.
Yeah, so I mean, people think turtles are this big. These turtles are that big.
Yeah, they're big. And they take their own time and they create false nests, dig really deep, and where they nest, they lay eggs on those.
Vardhan, can you tell us a little bit about the destruction of coral and this idea that they suddenly said the coral doesn't exist? I mean, I was shown older map of coral and then a new map where suddenly there's no coral.
Yeah. I think it's true that if you compare that map between 20 and 21, corals have disappeared, which definitely raises sort of serious concerns. And as a researcher, I've been diving there, documenting trajectory. So I know how it was and what kind of changes have happened. They are sessile organisms. After tsunami, there was a remarkable recovery of the reefs. And I started diving since 2005. So by 2008, 2009, by 2010, there were corals which are as big as Maruti cars had come up. There are, in terms of diversity, they are spectacular. What I would really like to point out is that the geographical location of Nicobar is very close to area called Coral Triangle. And it is believed, there is a theory, evolutionary theory, that corals originated in Coral Triangle, which is somewhere between Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. So because Nicobar's geographical proximity is to Coral Triangle, species diversity is extraordinarily high. Altogether, there are approximately 173 unique coral species that are documented, and new coral species are also found. And corals, as their reproduction is, they have all kinds of reproduction. They have sexual reproduction, asexual reproduction. So there are new gametes, new corals are even getting formed now. And I've been diving all along the coast. I've dived in Lakshadweep, Gulf of Mannar, Gulf of Kutch, in Naitrani, Grand Island, Angria Bank. But some of the most spectacular reefs are in the Nicobar Islands, especially where project is planned. The down south part, just above Galathea, they were some of the most spectacular reefs I found. Another interesting point is that these reefs are fringing reefs. So in official documents that where they've changed the map, they've also called these reefs as atoll reefs, which is not true. These are all fringing reefs. They start growing from as shallow as 1 feet, and they go down up to 25 meters. And they, of course, grow in areas where they need sunlight, because the animals, they need photosynthesis. So they grow in up to 25 meters. So they are found everywhere. And definitely in terms of damage, if there is a proposed project goes ahead, there's definitely going to be big impact to the corals. Another point is maybe which is that corals are under Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, which means they have given highest level of legal protection, as stringent as what tiger gets. So killing a coral is as a punishable offense as what you have for tigers. And that is something which is not spoken about. So I think these are some of the facts, and definitely there was damage to corals during tsunami. But since then, there have been remarkable recovery. In 2008, there was a bleaching event when Nicobar reefs were impacted. Then 2012, there was an impact to the reefs where there was a bleaching event. But this bleaching event was localized. And there were few reefs which were damaged, whereas few reefs have survived. And as part of my PhD, what I've been studying is reef resilience, which is a system concept, which is, of course, used in economy and many other things. So essentially, it is ability of system to bounce back. What I observed is that during tsunami, the impact was, although there was heavy impact, system bounced back in many areas. But when there is, also there in terms of local conditions were favorable. And for corals to thrive, they need many conditions such as salinity, pH, temperature, range of other things. And because Nicobar has all those conditions which are sort of optimal or ideal, they are definitely growing very well. Also, they are very evolutionarily distinct and some of the most diverse that I have seen.
So it's a very interesting thing you just told me, which it hadn't struck me in the way you said it. Corals are as protected as tigers are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So destroying Nicobar corals is as if you're killing hundreds and hundreds of tigers in India. That's the same, is the equivalent, right? Yeah. You're basically wiping out a huge chunk of valuable resource for India, biological resource for India, and it's similar to essentially destroying Project Tiger.
Yes.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that also it's coral reefs, of course, they provide home to variety of associated organisms. So that's also something to consider. And some of the species are endemic. They're not found anywhere else. So there are a lot of associated fauna which will also get impacted. And one more point which I want to mention is that sort of coral reefs, when we talk about it, of course, they provide habitat, they boost fish diversity, all of that is there, but they also sequester a lot of carbon. Right. So they are big carbon sinks. So they are very important from that point of view. So it's not just biological diversity or the spectacularness, but there is also the ecological role that they play.
Also, relevance, if I may add, Rahulji, is the fact that India has the capability. We have mapped bathymetric maps of the entire coastline across the country. And the bathymetry of the Nicobar Islands shows the fringing reef phenomenon happening across the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Yeah. So suddenly for a reef to emerge in the middle of the ocean or even a couple of kilometers from shore is impossible.
Right.
There has to be a certain amount of height. And if you look at the bathymetric charts that the Navy has, the NIOT has also mapped these spaces and so on. It's impossible.
So this is just deception. It's a deception. One last question I had, which was about the FIR, the tribal FRA, sorry. You know, we were told that the FRA was not used, it was misused, people were not asked questions. Can you give us on how you feel the FRA was not used?
So, first of all, the FRA is very clearly modeled and is given a format as to how an FRA process or a meeting and for a Gram Sabhas can take place. Secondly, the meetings that were were conducted under the Gram Sabhas of Lakshmi Nagar, Shastri Nagar, and other settler community villages where there's no tribal community who has rights over the forest. So that's the first and big flaw of claiming or kind of seeking to claim that an FRA meeting has been conducted for diversion of forest land amongst people who have no rights to those forests. Actually, the rightful owners of those forests are the tribal community.
It's like doing FRA in Delhi.
Exactly.
That let's not do it in Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand. Let's do it in Delhi. Yeah. Irrelevant.
And you and I are people who are non-tribals who are responding on behalf of somebody else. It doesn't make sense at all.
Right.
So the second issue is just having one person on board as a tribal community person, as a representative of the entire tribal community is also not correct. There are stipulated norms and the numbers of people who have to be present in those lands, and one person can't sign off on the lands of diversion of somebody else's lands. Yep. So it's a very clear-cut violation of the norms and the rules through the FRA. And what is very important to remember is that there are the two communities, the Shompen and the Nicobarese, who live on Great Nicobar, and for whom the forest and the lands, like for anybody, land is a premium commodity, especially for them because their dependence on their natural resources is so much that they will not be able to survive in the long run without those lands. And taking away land from these tribal communities is only kind of pushing them further into the brink and marginalizing them further. So if we take into consideration the fact that a tribal welfare plan has been devised for these communities, it is a misnomer because you're actually pulling the rug under their feet, in a sense. You're removing the land and saying, I'm going to create a tribal welfare plan for you. I will create a shelter for you, or I'll provide food for you. I'm going to make you dependent on me, and so on and so forth. It's not going to work in the long run. And I would also like to point out that way back, in 2018, under the aegis of the Niti Aayog, there was a subcommittee formed with an eminent anthropologist, Dr. Vishwajit Pandya, who was heading that subcommittee. I was also part of it, as we were all part of the Andaman Nicobar Tribal Research Institute at that point of time. And our objective was to try and record and report on from the ground as to how the tribal communities responded to this entire proposal. And it is very clear that the settler communities had a yearning for development, and they still do. They have been denied and been apathetic to the developmental needs of the community there. Whereas the Nicobarese were very clear that they did not want tourism in their villages or their land. They wanted to be left alone to carry on their own lives. And most important was actually the Shompen, who we interviewed and got on camera. Shompen, both women and men. Only one man is there in the video, which is not made public. But where both the old lady and the man says, please do not come into our forest. These are our forests where we feed our children. And that voice has not been adhered to or heard from these people concerned. So this is a very important facet of actually also another very important thing is the fact that the EI, the Environmental Impact Assessment, the AECOM report, all of these reports, including the local line department reports, deny the existence of Shompen in those forests. I know, and I can vouch for, I have the waypoints, the geo coordinates of 3 Shompen settlements which are located in that said area. So even in a court of law, we are able to prove the fact that there are Shompen who live in those areas. And those spaces are so important for them in terms of their livelihood security. Because they have food gardens. All those forests are food gardens for them. Not just forests the way you and I and mainstream people generally think of it. They are food gardens. They know where to find what resource at what point of time in the year. So, yeah.
But broadly, what you're saying is that the stakeholders themselves have not been asked. They've been bypassed, and you've created something else and called it the actual stakeholders.
Absolutely. Not a single FRA title is being granted to anybody. Right. FRA was instituted way back in 2006. We are talking about 2026, about 20 years after the FRA was instituted as an act. And not a single FRA title has been handed out or given out to the Nicobarese. And also important to note is the fact that they own land at a community level and as kinship groups, not individually.
Right.
They are a tribal community and they own land as a community, as groups, kinship groups who own and share land between kinship groups as well.
So their concept of ownership is fundamentally different. Absolutely. And you can't apply the rules that you apply to individual ownership. Well, absolutely. Thank you very much. I think this is very useful. I came out of that conversation with one thought I can't shake. Vardhan told me our corals are protected under the same law at the same level as our tigers. So destroying the reefs of Nicobar is like wiping out hundreds and hundreds of tigers in one stroke. It's the equivalent of destroying Project Tiger, and almost nobody is talking about it. And Manish reminded me of something deeper. Our tribal communities aren't behind us. In many ways, they're ahead of us. They remember the tsunami when the rest of us forgot. They've lived within these forests for thousands of years without destroying them. These are food gardens where they feed their children, not empty land waiting to be developed. A flawed idea of modernity says we must erase everything that doesn't make sense to us. I don't accept that. Real development puts people first. The people who live in these habitats today and the people who will inherit them tomorrow. So here's what I'll ask of you. Watch the video on Great Nicobar. It's on my YouTube channel right now. Share it, talk about it. The more Indians who understand what's at stake, the harder it becomes to do this quietly. Because we are going to make sure they back down. But we can't do it without you.